So I'm starting my presentation. Hello, everyone. I'm Yawen from China Center for Agricultural Policy, Peking University. Oh, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay. I will go ahead. My presentation is about the gift reallocation, women's decision-making power of China's poverty alleviation regulation program. As we know, women empowerment is one of the core issues of economic development, particularly in the developing world, and women's intra-household decision-making power is an important component of women empowerment. We know many researchers focus on evaluating the effect of microfinance programs on women's decision-making power. However, the results are mixed. One explanation may be the poverty trap theory. This theory argues that the moments out of poverty requires a big push, so the political interventions toward poor women are not so useful. A natural question arising from this is that can big push programs improve women's decision-making power within households? So we explored the carrot effect of the PRP on women's decision-making power in China. We find several conclusions. First, we find that relocation is associated with a large increase in married women's relative decision-making power. And our channel analysis finds that the increase of absolute non-farm wage income instead of the relative non-farm wage income of married women acts as a determinant of their relative decision-making power, and also increased access to microcredit and municipalities for relocated households are also important channels. We also find heterogeneous effect of relocation among different groups. We think our paper contribute to the literature meaning twofold. First, we think our paper is closely related to literature and intra-household decision-making power. To the best of my knowledge, this paper is also the first paper to employ the PRP to study the changes of women's decision-making power in China. And we also contribute to the understanding of how relocation affects household outcomes, especially women's decision-making power in developing countries. As for the history of China's PRP, we can divide into 3 stages, and our paper mainly focuses on the third stage, which ranges from 2016 to 2020. After stage victory of the poverty reduction in China, there is still remaining poverty concentrated in several mountainous areas, and it would be quite difficult for these populations to move out of poverty if they remained where they were. There are some figures. First, more than 9 million people relocated with 5 years in the third stage, and the relocation time really depends on the construction progress of some resettlement project. So the relocation time is exogenous to some households, and there are several follow-up actions. It is worth noting that in the resettlement community, there are a wide range of measures targeted at women, such as the workshops and the trainings to upgrade women's vocational skills. Our survey is a longitudinal survey which were conducted in 4 wings, primarily determined designed to evaluate the impact of PRP on the welfare of relocated households. The sampling design is mainly the stratified random sampling, as you can see from figure 1. The distribution of 16 sampled countries in shaded blue is quite representative. And we also conduct several restrictions to our sample selection. We restrict data to the 2 latest waves, since the household decision-making power module were only conducted in these 2 waves, and we exclude households polluted by other policies and restrict our attention to households that had at least 1 cohort. Finally, we got an analytical sample of around 2,000 households. Our dependent variable is women's aggregate relative decision-making power, which is defined as number of decisions made by wife minus the number of decisions made by husband, and we can say women's aggregate decision-making power is significantly higher for relocating households, and wives made around 3 fewer decisions than their husband on average. This is our baseline regression specification, and the coefficient of interest is beta 1. And we also controls wives, husband, households characteristics, and household relocation year fixed effect. However, there may exist potential selection effects, so we employ the IV strategy. Our IV is a dummy variable indicating whether the household should relocate at the severe according to the relocation plan of the villager group. As we can see from the column 1 of table 2, the first stage regression shows that the expected year of relocation can explain about 60% of agricultural actual relocation status of sample household. Column 2 and 3 represents the OLS estimate. The estimate of relocated is positive but insignificant. However, the two state least square estimate shows the coefficient of relocated is significant, positive, and much bigger than the OLS. However, positive change in women's aggregate relative decision-making power may not necessarily mean an increase in women's decision-making power status, because different items importance varies a lot. Women may control more less important decision items at the expense of more independent ones. But from table 3, we can see that all estimate of coefficients of the 6 decisions are either positive or insignificantly negative, which confirms our main results. Also, we conduct several channel analysis. We first explore how changes of women's absolute and relative wage income can affect the relocation effect by including these variables in our baseline regression. And then we use the same method to explore how changes of farmland and household assets can affect the relocation effect on women's decision-making power. And also we explore the effect of access to microcredit and access to counties and markets. We also explore the heterogeneous effects separately estimated by relocation type and include the interaction term by relocation and the non-farm employment status and migration status of women and her husband. So I will conclude explore variations in the phasing time of relocation to evaluate the effect of relocation on women's decision-making power, and we find a significant positive effect of relocation. And we also conduct several channel analysis and heterogeneous effects. And finally, we think our results have important policy implications, highlight the need to pay attention to the current effects of relocation programs, especially in the developing countries on women's empowerment, and underline policies that both increase the quality and the quantity of jobs for poor women. This is my presentation. Thanks for listening. And any questions?
Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions? That was really interesting. Thank you so much. I'm wondering, there's a lot of research here in the business literature in the United States about the ability of women to network. So they're big networkers in comparison to men. Have you looked at that in terms of that research? So there, it's easier for them to find social connections, and I wonder what the impact would be on that.
Thanks for your question. As for this paper, I didn't look for the networks for women. There may be the feature of the program, and the program provides many jobs by the government, but not but not too far from their network. But I will explore this point. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Josh, you're next.
Great. Let me share my screen here. We can get started. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Everybody see the screen there?
Not yet. It just says started. There we go.
Okay. Is it up? Okay. Awesome. All right. Well, hi, everyone. And I'm Josh Beverly, and I will be presenting the paper, The Dynamics of Labor Force Participation, All Quiet on the Appalachian Front, that I wrote in conjunction with Clint Neal and Shamar Stewart. Today, I will be, just briefly, of course, discussing the introduction, motivation, methodology, results, conclusions, and a few policy implications that we have in this paper. In this paper, we study specifically the role and relative importance of national, regional, and state level influences on the change in U.S. state labor force participation rates over time. So this is important because not all responses to economic or labor market shocks are created equal. And so that is to say that responses to these shocks vary within and across geographic areas. And so, for example, we see that back in the 1970s, while most U.S. areas really experienced declines in economic activity during the OPEC oil embargo during that time, the Appalachian region specifically experienced soaring employment, labor force participation rates, and earnings due to its connection with oil and natural resources and gas and like that, and the major industries in the area. And so that's one example of why we study the spatial spatial role and influences on labor force participation rates. But a few more reasons why we do in this paper is that because if there's a common labor force participation behavior over space and time, has implications for employment growth, GDP, timing, or even labor policy, timing of labor policy in general. Secondly, there's a unique kind of relationship that's documented in the literature between the Appalachian region and labor force participation. And it's kind of a debate over the last 20 or 30 years of whether or not this kind of relationship exists and like that. And so we add to that discussion in this paper as well. And then parts of the Appalachian region, if you're unfamiliar, is they're regarded as some of the most economically distressed areas in the US. And so the Appalachian region and the US in general have much to gain with increases in labor force participation rates and economic prosperity if we can see those increases for some of these places. So we study spatial influences on labor force participation rates over time by using monthly US state labor force participation rates from 1976 to 2020. And we use a dynamic factor model with time-varying parameters and stochastic volatility to capture this kind of a co-movement or in the labor force participation rates across the nation and within the Appalachian region. And so anything that's not kind of attributed to the co-movement at those two levels, we then designate as an idiosyncratic fluctuation or that's represented as like a state-specific factor. So we've got these three different latent factors that we calculate with this model. After we calculate these factors and kind of which are the levels of synchronization or co-movement in the labor force participation rate series, we then calculate the correlation of each state's labor force participation series with these factors. And so these diagrams here present basically the correlation values, or they're called factor loadings that represent the correlation between these select number of states. We've done it for all the states in the US, but I selected a few here for the presentation. And the blue lines are the median values of our posterior distribution that includes 40,000 draws. And so the dotted lines are the 5th and 95th percentiles around those medians. And we see kind of a similar pattern, if you notice, in just these 4 states, but across the nation as well, that we see positive correlation values with a national or common component after about 1990 across all of the states. And so this indicates that state labor force participation rates are influenced by a common national component, specifically in the last 3 decades. Next, as I mentioned, we also calculate a Appalachian region factor for Appalachian states. And so this measures the synchronization or the level of synchronization of the labor force participation rates over time within those 13 states. And we calculate the correlation of each state labor force participation series with that factor as well. And so once again, the blue lines are the medians of our posterior distributions, and then the dotted lines are the 5th and 95th percentiles once again. And so we find that for all states, other than West Virginia in this case, so I have 3 other states here, if you can see, they're pretty much they're pretty close to near zero correlation with a regional factor. And so we find that for most Appalachian states, there's not really, they're not influenced by any kind of Appalachian, a common Appalachian component, which kind of goes towards that debate that I mentioned earlier. So we're going to side on that end of the debate. West Virginia, though, however, does show a few points here, if you can see, of strong kind of correlation with a Appalachian component, that it is influenced by kind of an Appalachian influence. But we see that these points correspond with major shocks to the coal industry. There's coal boom and bust. That was the state's primary industry at the time. And so it's kind of more related to natural resources in that area. And then lastly, our model allows us to actually decompose the variation in the change in state labor force participation rates by how much of the variation is explained by each of the factors that we calculated. And so for a given point in time, these graphs show what proportion of the variance is explained by our 3 factors. And so you can see over time we have changes, quite a bit across within states and across states. And so I've presented here another selected number of states. We see that the purple is the national factor and this yellow is the state factor, and those 2 colors kind of dominate all the graphs here, right? So most of the variation is explained by those 2 factors, whether it be common national component or just state fluctuations in itself. The one exception, again, of course, that we see is West Virginia, and we see stronger relative regional factor contribution to the variance. And once again, back here in the the 80s, during kind of natural resource shocks, the coal industry, things like that, and then after about 2016, 2020. The Trump administration had a number of policies with natural resources that affected the state of West Virginia as well. And so we see that here as a regional factor. But it is something that we do plan, West Virginia specifically is something that we do plan to investigate further in the future. We do see a couple other things, though. If you notice that there's large national factor contributions during times of like national recession or shocks, so like 1991 recession, 2001 recession, following the 2008-2009 recession and the labor force participation drop-offs in 2010, and then of course the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. And we see those across all the states. We also even see, for example, in Louisiana here, 2005, of course, Hurricane Katrina. And so it had a strong idiosyncratic or a state-specific effect for the state of Louisiana as well. And so, and we know that these shocks, it's interesting because our results do give us some implications for the timing of shocks. So even national recessions, we see that a state or a national factor or a national component really only lasts a few years before other factors or components kind of take over in changing labor force participation rates in each of the states. So what do all these kind of results mean for application and so for policy? Well, first of all, given that we see that there is relatively more, that U.S. states' labor force participation rates are relatively more influenced by a common national component over time, we suggest that this also makes individual states and the U.S. Overall more vulnerable to national labor market shocks, right? So it kind of makes sense as states, series and stuff are behaving more the same way, that a large national shock, for example, like COVID-19, could have a larger effect on labor force participation rates and the economy in general in the future. So that's something that's important to keep in mind for federal policy as those states, the states in the United States become more synchronized. Also, from the last slide, we saw that the shocks don't last very long. And so during those shocks, there's a lot of divergence, right? Different states respond in different ways, as I mentioned from the example earlier. And so we suggest that states may recover from negative labor market shocks faster if more targeted policy is implemented during those short periods of time. And federal policy at at these times may help some states, but hinder others. So we would suggest that federal policy might be reserved for and more suited for the times that when the state labor force participation rates are more synchronized, it can have a greater effect to help all the states. And then lastly, we find, as the title of my paper, that it's pretty much all quiet on the Appalachian fronts. We don't find much evidence for a strong Appalachian influence for all the Appalachian states. Of course, West Virginia is the exception there, and we kind of contribute that to its historical dependence on natural resources and those industries in the state. So we do plan to investigate West Virginia a little bit further in the future. All right, are there any questions?
Thanks, Josh. Any questions for Josh? So it's quiet except in West Virginia.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, if there are no questions, I'm just going to move on to the next presentation. And that's me. I'm going to share my screen. All right. So good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. Today, I'll talk about our research on agritourism and direct sales clusters. And this project is really an outcome of a currently NIFA-funded research project on agritourism development in the United States. If you don't know what agritourism is, we do have a lot of international people on today. I thought I'm going to talk a little bit about it. You see the pretty pictures here on the right. So I like to define agritourism as every time a farmer welcomes visitors to their farm, they're going to do some kind of they're doing some kind of agritourism. So there are many definitions of what agritourism is at the state level, at the municipal level, and even most of the researchers, they all have different definitions. I really like this one, this graph on the left that shows 5 categories. So that's entertainment. So that's the type you probably have experience with: corn mazes, sunflower fields for pictures, and so on. Education, like school tours, hospitality, recreation, and direct sales. So please note that I included direct sales here as well. We found that there's a lot of literature out there on agritourism as well as direct sales and the local food movement, but not much of this literature that looks at these together. So just want to highlight 2 previous studies. So Van Zandt looked at the drivers of agritourism clusters with 2012 census data. And that was really the first study that used regional science method to look at how agritourism development depends on place-based factors. And they did not include direct sales. And only Brown included both agritourism and local foods revenues at their county level analysis within the same regression. So we found no other research that has considered direct sales within agritourism cluster analysis in the United States. So what did we do in our study? We apply spatial methods to understand how these activities are clustered over space. And we look at whether agritourism and direct sales detract or reinforce one another, looking at both within the counties and across county lines using panel data analysis. We use local Moran's eye to identify hotspots of agritourism and direct sales, and then bivariate to look at the spatial association of these two. And with a seemingly unrelated regression spatial Durbin model, we look at the association of farms with agritourism and farms with direct sales. And our dependent variables are shares of farms with agritourism and farms with direct sales from the 2007 to 2017 censuses of agriculture. And then we grouped our explanatory variables in 4 groups: farm operators, socioeconomic characteristics, and farm production type. Just a couple of words about our data source. So for our dependent variables, the only data source we have is the Ag census. And there are some issues with this data collection from a research and from an extension perspective. So agritourism is defined as hay rides, hunting, fishing, and so on. And when it comes to direct sales in 2017, the census started to include value-added sales into direct sales. So 2012 and 17, they're not directly comparable. And for direct sales, only edible ag products are included. And great example, Christmas trees, they're their own category, even though they're really a classic agritourism example. So when people go out and get their own Christmas tree. And there's also no distinction between on-farm and off-farm sales. And we also don't know the type of agritourism that operators do. So we only have data from surveys. So more info on data and sources can be found online in our paper. And now I hope you like maps because there will be a lot of them now. I'll start with the initial spatial descriptive results. From census data, we know that the Northeast has the highest share of agritourism or direct sales farms. So it's almost 19% of all farms are in the Northeast. And then you have the Western region, it's 11%, and the Midwest has the least. And then here we have the maps of clusters of agritourism 2012, 2017 on the right. Based on their local Moran's Eye, the two largest high clusters, so that's red, are in the Midwest region in Montana, Texas, Colorado, and then another relative large one appears in the Northeast region close to New York City. And similar map was published by Van Zandt in 2018. They found that so that's a probability of a county being a hotspot is influenced by the rurality, outdoor attractions, and travel infrastructure. So in comparison, our 2017 map shows some expansion of the high clusters near New York City and then in Wyoming and Colorado. So you see that there are lots of changes happening. And as mentioned before, when we now look at direct-to-consumer sales, the data are not comparable between 2012 and 2017 because more is now counted in 2017. I still put them beside each other. So as expected, the hotspots are clustered in the Northeast region and in the coastal areas because this is where most of the farms are, and the counties around the Great Lakes. But with the data change, the clusters got smaller along the West Coast, which is very curious. Now looking at the, so because at the bivariate Moran's Eye, we only look at the data change in 2017 because they're not comparable otherwise. When we consider agritourism as the X, so the local variable, and direct sales as Y, so the neighboring variable in the first map, the location of the high clusters are determined mainly by the hotspots of direct sales. And the bivariate high clusters are still concentrated in the Northeast regions, you can see. So some West Coastal counties and some counties around the Great Lakes. So when we flip this role of agritourism and direct sales as local and neighboring variables, so now that's the second map below, we can see way fewer counties identified as the high clusters. And the greater influence of direct sales compared to agritourism in determining these high clusters means that there are simply way more farms with direct sales than with agritourism. So the maps with the univariate and bivariate local Moran's Eye show that many counties are in either the high or low clusters. So that implies we have a positive association of the two activities, but we also see many counties in the low-high or high-low clusters where we can't really tell if these two activities are positively associated. So as I mentioned, we used regression to analyze the association of farms with agritourism and farms with direct sales. So we find that agritourism and direct sales reinforce each other within the same category. Counties that have higher shares of farms with direct sales 5 years earlier tend to have higher shares of farms with agritourism and vice versa. So these mutual impacts are statistically significant within counties, but they're not consistent across neighboring counties. So more research is needed. And so we do find that agritourism and direct sales interact positively with each other. And that's important because studies that look at only one variable at a time may be missing important effects compared to when both are considered simultaneously. And as I mentioned in the beginning, not many studies look at this together. So this needs to be explored in further research. We also find that counties with more female farmers and farms with more disposable income, they have more agritourism, and counties with larger farms, they have less. And that's also similar to previous research, to their findings. And we also think that census data collection should be improved. Direct sales should include non-edibles and fiber, and we definitely need more information about the type of agritourism activities. That would be very helpful for research and extension programming. For example, we know that we have a lot of farms and ranches in Texas that offer agritourism. You saw that it was totally lighting up as a hotspot. But from anecdotal data and survey data, we know that Texas has mostly cattle ranches, so they offer a lot of farm stays, so dude ranches and hunting. But then in the Northeast, it's a totally different type of agritourism. So we have more education and pumpkin patches and farm stays and dinners and so on. And that's important because understanding the type of agritourism is critical for extension, because we need to know what farmers need. So that's the end of my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I'll stop sharing. No questions. Everything is quiet. And we're just going to move on to the next presentation, which is...
I had one actually real quick there, Claudia.
Oh, hey, yes.
I mean, I know you just did the kind of a panel over the 2 years, and of course it's spatially, as you mentioned, you have differences across states and counties. Is there, I don't know if there's something, because I know that like state fairs and many states have, very kind of famous, you could say, I guess, state fairs with kind of agritourism, as you mentioned, and different things. Is that, I don't know if there's anything there that, that you maybe have considered or something with like a state fair in terms of its relation to agritourism?
No, we haven't. And it's any sales that farmers would have that would be considered as off farm. Right. But it would be still included in direct sales.
Okay.
So that's where we're saying there should be this distinction. But yeah, those fairs are fun.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
All right. The next speaker is you can identify yourself because I don't want to say your name wrong. Thank you so much.
This is Xiaolu Wang. I'm sorry that I can't share my screen. Please wait me for a little moment. Good morning, professors, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Xiaolu Wang from China Agricultural University, and my topic today is multi-generational effects of early life hunger experience on the socioeconomic status in adulthood. I will give my report based on the following 4 factors. The first part is introduction, and here is some background information. As the COVID-19 pandemic and regional conflicts intensify, the global food security situation worsens. According to the United Nations report, the state of food security and nutrition in the world, between 720 million and 811 million people were hungry in 2020, an increase of around 118 million compared to 2019. Knowing about the consequences and the process of early life experiences is a crucial subject for human welfare. Past research tells us early life experiences can have a long-lasting impact on individuals. Hunger experiences, which directly lead to malnutrition, affect the fetus and the baby's growth in many aspects, such as brain cognition, and put them at a disadvantage in persistent health. Childhood hunger experience also has deep impacts on mental health because of the psychological scars it left behind. When it comes to the impact on socioeconomic welfare later in life, some researchers hold the opinion that the experience of hunger makes people more risk averse and prefer saving, but others believe that it encourages people to take risks. And they find that adverse experience increases the likelihood of becoming an entrepreneur by making individuals more self-reliant, resourceful, and effective in dealing with failures. Moreover, the effects of early life hunger experiences can be transferred intergenerationally through social, economic, and biological channels. As Figure 1 shows, China experienced nationwide starvation from 1959 to 1961, providing a natural quasi experiment for this study. After reading literature, we found that After reading literature, we found that there still exist some research gaps that can be supplemented. The first is that there is a lack of research on the multidimensional and the multifaceted impact on socioeconomic status. The second is that we find disagreements among scholars in the impact of early hunger experiences on socioeconomic status. And the third is that there are few empirical studies on the intergenerational impact of hunger experience due to the difficulty of data acquisition. So the objective of this study is to investigate how fetal and pre-3-year-old hunger experiences affect individuals' future social-economic status systematically in 3 dimensions: education, income, and occupation, and further explore whether the influences exist in the next generation with our large sample. Data used in this paper come from a 400,367 observation sample from the 6 national census of 2005 and 2015 of the National Bureau of Statistics in China, covering 31 provinces. The final sample of the first generation used in this paper includes individuals born between January 1954 and December 1962 who have rural hukou. We find the offspring of them based on family relationship and age variables. The measurement of hunger intensity is generated from provincial excess mortality in different years, and the data comes from the China Compendium of Statistics 1949 to 2004. Table 1 shows the hunger levels vary by provinces, and we use Model 1 to estimate the hunger intensity experienced by a specific individual. Table 2 is the summary statistics. We use years of schooling to measure education, income per week to measure the income level, and occupation is measured by weekly labor supply and the occupational prestige score with reference to Chinese Occupational Prestige Measurement Index compiled by Li Chunling. These 3 rows report the mean value of hunger intensity experienced by individuals affected by hunger experience in utero within age 0 to 1 and within age 1 to 3. This page is about the 2 models we used. Following the idea of DID, we built a reduced form linear relationship between hunger intensity and adult outcomes, Y. XI in model 2 represents personal characteristics, including a series of dummy variables like whether individual I is male, whether it is belonging to 2005 census data, and comes from rural area. This is the birth province fixed effect, and this measures the birth year fixed effect. We used the groups who experienced hunger in the fetus at age 0 to 1 and at age 1 to 3 as the experimental group, which assigned the value 1, and the groups born in 1954 to 1958 as the control group that assigned the value 0. Because of the large difference of male and female in the summary statistics, we separate the sample for regression. We can see from table 4 that Mirroring the results for men, a negative and statistically significant association is observed between in utero hunger experience and the labor market performance for women. Table 5 shows that the negative effect of hunger experience during the first year of life still exists on both men and women. But we should notice that it also leads to a 0.64 years increase in females' education, which is contrary to some research. We think that this may because of the existence of patriarchal ideology, more girls starved to death than boys. From table 6, we can see that hunger experience within age 1 to 3 have slightly positive effect on women's education and have slightly a negative effect on women's occupational prestige, but it has no significant effect on men. This may be because the negative effect is offset by the honoring effect of adversity. In the robustness test, we first think about the fertility choices problem. If the choices exist, the negative effects of hunger experience may also be underestimated. Since it's impossible to control, the estimation results in this paper can be regarded as the lower limit of the impact of hunger experience. Besides, we generate a variable trend, a time trend specific to the province, and add it into the Model 3. It absorbs the long run time trends in the outcomes that may vary depending on the province. We found that though the result is slightly different, the effects still exist. The results of the first generation implicated that fetal hunger experience has the biggest negative effect on individual socioeconomic status, particularly on labor market performance. Positive effects of hunger experience begin to appear between 0 to 1 year of age, with the least effect of hunger experience between 1 to 3 years of age, indicating that there are some positive impacts that offset some of the negative impacts. Table 7 shows the effects of the hunger experience on the second generation. There is a significant positive effect of mother's hunger experience on female offspring's occupational prestige and the labor supply. Father's hunger experience has a significant positive effect on male offspring's education and a slight significant negative effect on male offspring's income. Finally, we land on our conclusion. Firstly, early life hunger has the potential to impact the socioeconomic status in adulthood. The negative impact is mainly on occupational prestige and working hours. The adverse effects of fetal starvation experience are bigger than that in 1 year from birth and bigger than that in 1 to 3 years from birth. Secondly, mother's hunger experience is beneficial to female occupational prestige and labor supply. Father's hunger experience is beneficial to male offspring's education and is harmful to male offspring's income. There are also some limitations, such as unable to fully distinguish between the socioeconomic and the biological intergenerational channels, and we still face the problem of sample selection. In future, we will try to use microsurvey data to supplement the impact mechanism. We may use our 496 gene samples that have been investigated by our college in 2019 to explore the biological pathway of impact and reduce biases as well. That's all. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Any questions? Doesn't look like it. So next up is Yerong Huang. More children, more blessing. You're next.
Okay, everyone, let me share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Juerong Huang, and from China Agriculture University. The topic of my presentation is More Children, More Blessing, Fertility and Parental Happiness in Old Age. And the motivation for this study is based on a phenomenon. The rapid decline in fertility over the last few decades has accelerated population aging, introducing the risk of insufficient old age support. In China, the elderly dependency rate was nearly 20% in 2020 and is predicted to succeed 50% in 2030. In response, the Chinese government implemented the three-child policy in last year, allowing Chinese couple to have 3 children unconditionally. While this policy is expected to raise fertility rates in China, it remains unclear whether increase in fertility will improve parents' well-being in old age. And children remain the main source of old age support for parents due to the filial piety culture. Old age support for senior parents is common in Chinese families, and the children are also an important source of income, especially in areas where external pension systems are underdeveloped. Theoretically, having more children may not actually improve parents' well-being in old age for at least 3 reasons. First, parents may sacrifice their welfare for parenthood when having an additional child, such as increased financial burden and reduced nutritional intake. And second, given the QQ trade-off theory, parents' well-being may be reduced due to the lowered average child quality. And third, their responsibility the amount of old age support that parents may receive depends on the bargaining power of their adult children. Adult children may shirk their responsibilities when having more siblings. So whether fertility affects parental well-being in old age is an empirical question. And how about relevant literature? Recently, some studies have been paid attention on the short-term fertility effects on parents, such as time pressure for parenthood, labor supply, and life satisfaction, but much less attention paid to the long-term effects on parental well-being. On the other hand, despite its popularity in studies conducted in Western countries, happiness as a well-behaved proxy for one's utility, it received much less attention in China. Well, this investigation on happiness also helps us to predict individuals' other well-being and behaviors. So our study makes 2 contributions to the literature. First, it is among the few studies that bridge fertility and parental happiness in old age. And this study adds to the recent literature on the long-term consequences of fertility decisions. And to estimate the impact of fertility on senior parents' happiness, we considered the following model. The dependent variable is the level of happiness for the parents, and the key explanatory variable is the number of children to this parent. And we also controlled some characteristics and fixed effects. And we know the OLS estimation of the parameter beta 1 may be biased due to some unobserved factors, like healthier parents may have more children because the cost of childbearing tend to be lower for them. So we need to find a source of exogenous variation in fertility. And China's family planning policy provides us a feasible opportunity to identify the fertility effects. In the early 1970s, the later longer fever policy was enacted and saw the beginning of the China's family planning. And in 1979, the one-child policy was implemented and has been recognized as the most stringent globally. Yet its its implementation varied by region, ethic, and hukou. And so in the context of these two policies, we use two sorts of exogenous variations in fertility decision to achieve our identification. And so the two instruments are the mother's exposure to the policy. The first is constructed according to the mother's birth cohort, provincial fertility rates, and the establishment years of the LLF policy. And slightly different, the second instrument is constructed according to the provincial penalty rates. And the data we used draw from the China Family Panel Studies, a national representative survey. And we focus on the 2018 wave, since it's the only wave that enable us to estimate the impacts and explore potential channels. And the main results shown in this table. And column 1 and 5 shows the OLS estimates and suggests that the positive relationship between one's number of children and the happiness in old age. And the results in other columns shows the IV estimates. As shown in column 4 and column 8, we can, the estimates of the two IVs reveal that having an additional child improves senior parents' happiness by 0.76 points. Yet, how reliable are these results? We further conduct several robustness checks. The first is we assess the validity of IVs, and in first regressions, F statistics succeed the rule of thumb value of 10. And because we have two instruments, it allows us to do our identification test. The results provide little evidence against the validity of these IVs. And next, we further reperformed the IV estimations by considering some historic events like Cultural Revolution and Sandown Movement, and both two events. These estimates do not change so much. And another try, given the wide geographical variation in China, we further assess the robustness by removing some uncertain province, like uncertain the policy, the information of the policy implementation. And these results also barely change. And we also use some related outcomes to assess our results, like life satisfaction is another commonly used measure of subjective well-being in the literature. We found that parents with more children score higher on life satisfaction and lower on depression level. And these results lend further support to the reliability of our funding. And lastly, we explore the potential channels of the fertility effects. We found that parents face the QQ trade-off in terms of the number of children completed higher education achievements. And for children's old age support behaviors, parents with more children received more visits and daily care from their children. Okay, in conclusion, this paper mainly answers to question. We found that parents with more children are happier in old age, and this positive fertility effect on happiness may work through receiving more visits and daily care from their children. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. Any comments and advice are warmly welcomed. Thank you.
Thank you. That was really interesting.
Thank you.
Very happy about my choice and number of children now. Any other comments? Is Shannon here? Because I cannot see her in the list. There is one more presentation, the economics of plant-based milk. Is anyone taking over for Shannon? It doesn't sound like it. Okay, I mean, this marks the end of our session. Thank you so much, everyone, for presenting your paper, and I wish you good luck in your studies. Thanks.
Thank you, and for moderating as well.